officials before it is released to the public. Congressman Mike Conaway is a Republican representing Texas. He led the investigation by House Republicans into Russian meddling, and he joins us in the studio tonight. Congressman, thanks for coming on.
Tucker, good to be with you.
So is the report as definitive as we just suggested on the question of collusion?
Collusion. It is, Tucker. We've interviewed 73 witnesses. We looked at 300,000+ documents to try to find what there might be. We've seen some perhaps meetings that were inappropriate or ill-advised to have taken. We've seen some chance coincidences where people bump into each other in various places, but no evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians or the Clinton campaign and the Russians.
Now, are you satisfied that you saw enough intelligence gathered by our intel agencies to make that judgment?
Well, we made the judgment based on our own investigation of witnesses. We've interviewed, like I said, 73 witnesses looking for that thread that would lead us to a collusion, conspiracy, or coordination. We asked every witness that, and we've come to we found no evidence that anything like that was going on.
So Adam Schiff today, who would be the ranking Democrat on the committee, released a statement calling this report, and I'm quoting, a tragic milestone.
He hadn't read it yet.
So right. Well, he says it short circuits an investigation that he implies is just getting going.
Well, 14 months is not just getting going. Like I said, we've done the work we believe is necessary to answer the 4 questions. We had a pretty narrow scope. It did not include collusion, did not include a lot of things that perhaps the Dems would like to chase down. It had 4 questions. We had 4 questions to answer, and we think we've done the relevant investigation to answer those questions.
Huh. So you must have learned a lot about the story more broadly. It sounds like you did after all of that time. You say that the intel agencies released their famous report, the 17 so-called intelligence agencies, saying that the Putin government favored Trump. And you're saying that's not correct?
Well, first off, it's 3 agencies. The 17 agencies.
I'm aware. That's why I said so-called. But that is the talk.
Because I had to actually
including the Coast Guard and all the rest.
Yeah,
but it was 3. I'm aware.
John Podesta one time because he was trying to pitch that 17 agencies.
I hear it every night.
I'm pretty confident the NRO had no.
Yeah, I got that.
So the 3 that did, 98% of what they did on that ICA we agree with. We had 2 trained analysts and 2 trained professionals go through that with a fine-tooth comb, all of the underlying documents, some thousands of pages of documents to go through. And the piece about Trump. But the Putin purported preference for Trump, we think, is not supported by the evidence that was available throughout the entire process.
Why would they say that?
We'll have to ask them, but we believe that we disagree with them. That thing started early December and was finished in January, coinciding with an attack on the Trump presidency throughout that time frame by other issues, things going on.
Yes.
And this seemed to underpin that narrative that somehow Putin had more effect on the election than he should have, and it's delegitimatize the Trump presidency. Easy for you to say. The Trump presidency. It was part of that narrative.
But the intel agencies are taking it face value because, as we're often reminded by Democrats, are the final word on what's true. Well, it sounds almost like a political statement they were making.
Well, it looks like, but like I said, 98% of what they did in the ICA we think is the tradecraft. There is tradecraft associated with analytics, and that was properly followed. But just on that one piece about Putin's alleged preference for Trump, it was not supported by the.
I've never been clear on the underlying questions that undergird all of this, and that would be the hacking of the DNC servers and of John Podesta's Gmail account. And I asked the ranking Democrat on your committee, Adam Schiff, about this and couldn't get a straight answer. Are we absolutely positive that the Russian government was behind stealing that data?
I believe we're as positive as you can be in the circumstances where attribution is very difficult. But I'm comfortable believing that the Russian government was behind the hackers that did all this. The agency, IRA, whether the entities that were doing it, were done. It was done on behalf of the Russian government, if not on behalf of or directly by. So I'm comfortable making that statement. Again, attribution is very difficult in cyber world.
Will this convince anyone? Will the press, will MSNBC tomorrow say, you know what, we've been wrong for the last year?
Exactly. Throughout this whole time frame, I've been saying privately, because nobody's ever seen me on TV before tonight, to you guys and earlier, that there'll be some people agree with what we've said, some people disagree. What I want the report to stand on its own, so that folks say Conaway didn't have his thumb on the scale, Schiff didn't have his thumb on the scale, put as much of the underlying documentation in there as we possibly can so that readers can decide for themselves whether or not we did a thorough investigation and what we based our conclusions on, then let the American people make up their own mind. The real issue, though, is we've got elections starting right now. We had the Texas primary last week. We've got an election tomorrow. This is a big deal that we don't want the Russians or anyone interfering inappropriately with our election process. And so getting these conclusions out, beginning to have that conversation with the American people during this election season for 18 is really important. And that helped just get us to where we are right now.
Yeah, there's a lot we don't know, but you've confirmed what we've suspected all along, which is the collusion narrative was a lie. So
well, if the Democrats have additional evidence that they're not showing us, that they make reference to over and over, that they do have evidence that this drafting process will start in the morning, we'll have a chance to put it
let's see it. We can make up our own minds. Congressman, thank you for that. I appreciate the summary.
Thank you.
Thanks. Mark Stein is an author and columnist and a close observer of all things Russia plot related, and he joins us tonight. So, Mark, in my hand, I have a document that will end MSNBC's primetime schedule, which has been predicated on the idea that Trump is colluded with the Russians. I almost don't want to tell them because I don't want to wreck their ratings run. But what are they going to do when they find out? What is CNN going to do? What is the entire American media going to do with the fact that there was actually no collusion?
I think they'll just carry on as usual, Tucker, for the very good reason that they happen to agree with Putin on this. Putin's object, which is a reasonable one for any hostile power to take to other nations, is that he wanted to sow confusion. And he wound up sowing confusion because for the last 18 months, the Democrats and the media have run around like headless chickens, shrieking about some guy who happens to be related to a cabinet secretary who happens to find himself in a bar in the Seychelles, and a Russian walks into the bar. And it's actually not illegal to talk to Russians in bars or Russians in diners or Russians in department stores. That's not a crime. So if you want to go to a bar in the Seychelles and talk to a Russian, good luck to you. And what happened is that the great slow elephantine process of American investigations of this nature, which is always looking in the rear-view mirror. So we're great at investigating stuff that happened 2-3 years ago. Meanwhile, Putin's getting on with stealing the next election because everybody else is looking ahead while we're doing all this rear-view mirror stuff.
Well, that's a great question. But the next question would be, what about the people whose lives have been destroyed based on the understanding they were in some way colluding with Russia? That would include Carter Page, Ambassador Flynn, people who will never work meaningfully again, who had to sell their houses, who in Flynn's case were indicted. What happens to them? Does someone make them whole?
Well, I think so, and I actually think that's a more serious problem because I think there are serious questions about corruption and excessive use of muscle at the federal prosecutorial level. I don't think it's respectable that the federal government wins 97% of the cases that it drags into court. That's Saddam Hussein, Kim Jong-un levels of prosecutorial success, and Americans should be ashamed of it. And Americans who seem to think it's clever that you can put the screws on Mike Flynn and persuade him to plead guilty to something just because he doesn't want to have what's left of his savings account cleaned out. I think that's disgusting. And rather than obsessing and worrying about Russia for another 2 years, I'd like us to actually seriously address what is wrong with federal prosecution, what is wrong with the FBI, what is wrong with the DOJ, and clean it up, because it ain't respectable and Americans should be ashamed of it.
But that's what we're supposed to be doing in the media, aren't we? We're supposed to be on the lookout for bullies abusing their power and crushing the weak with their power to their own benefit. That's going on, and the cheerleaders of it are the media.
No, and there's something very weird about actually seeing the left, who used to be all about sticking it to the man, doing this thing, as you just quoted, the so-called 17 intelligence agencies. I don't know why we need 17 intelligence agencies, but for some reason it seems to impress left-wing journalists. So if we added another 32 intelligence agencies and we had 49, if we had 49 spook agencies, they'd be even more impressed. And these are the same people, by the way, The one practical thing to come out of this thing is we need election security in this country, and yet the same people who tell us that they're scared about Russians interfering in the election are the same people all over the country who are saying that illegal immigrants should have the right to vote. In which case, if a Venezuelan or a Colombian can vote, why the hell can't a Russian interfere in the election too? We can all get a piece of it.
That's exactly right. And they're the ones defeating voter ID laws, and they're the ones who are for online voting, which can easily be hacked, and against paper ballots. It's totally disingenuous. Those are not their concerns at all. What they worship is power. That's what they seek. End of conversation right there. Mark, thank you very much for putting it all in perspective, as always. ICE is searching for an illegal alien homicide suspect after Denver police let him out on the street. Once again, the left prioritizing the rights of illegal immigrants over your safety. Why are they doing that? Jorge Ramos joins us to discuss next. An illegal immigrant charged with homicide has been released and is out on the streets tonight because politicians in Denver have decided that keeping our country's borders open is a higher priority than protecting our citizens. Police say that Ivan Zamaripa Castaneda killed a truck driver in a hit and run. Federal law enforcement wanted him held in custody. But thanks to Denver's sanctuary city policies, authorities there refused. They did not hold him. They let him go. On Friday night, lawyer Paul Reyes came on this program and said that wasn't going to happen. The progressives in Denver were not trying to protect illegal immigrants at the expense of public safety. Watch this. Why wouldn't you, if you're the Denver Sheriff's Office, the second call them and say, this guy's leaving at this hour, be waiting for him? Why wouldn't they do that? What's the answer? They're not going to get sued for that.
Because as ICE itself has said, they are issuing on a daily basis, a weekly basis, between 35 and 40,000 of these detainers.
I'm not talking about 35. I'm talking about this guy, the guy charged with homicide. Why wouldn't they do it in this specific case? Will Denver do that? Why wouldn't they?
The reason they did not was because, again, ICE did not make him a priority by failing to get the warrant for him. Because they did not get the warrant, the local law enforcement did not take it seriously. The local law enforcement
now you're being
does need a warrant.
They're not doing it because they don't care. That's the truth, and you know it. Well, he was, of course, being disingenuous. ICE asked the Denver Sheriff's Office for notice if Zamaripa Castaneda was going to be released, but deputies in Denver refused. After he posted a $25,000 bond, Zamaripa Castaneda was released at about 5:30 p.m. on Saturday evening. ICE was not notified for more than an hour, and by that time, he was gone. Zamaripa Castaneda is now on the loose. He's an immigrant fugitive. So a person is dead, and all the Democratic Party can think of is how to protect his killer from deportation? That's normal on the left now. In Oakland, California, federal authorities wanted to arrest drug dealers, child molesters, and gang members, but Mayor Libby Schaaf warned them so they could get away before the feds showed up. The press howled, and a woman called Perla Morales Luna had her arrest caught on camera. You've probably seen it online today. They suggested she'd been abducted from her family. It turns out she was wanted on human trafficking charges. That may not have made your Facebook feed. In Baltimore, meanwhile, one of the poorest cities in the country, officials cut city funding for streetlights and trash cans to plug a hole in the budget, and yet somehow the city found hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay lawyers to represent illegal aliens fighting federal law. In all cases, the message could not be clearer to the rest of us. Democrats are on the side of illegal aliens over hurting American citizens. They're not even pretending anymore. Jorge Ramos is a Univision anchor. He just wrote a book. It's called Stranger, The Challenge of a Latino Immigrant in the Trump Era. He joins us tonight. Jorge, thanks for coming on.
Tucker, great to be here again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and congratulations on the book. And the book is partly about what American policies ought to be. We're talking about what America's policies ought to be on this show. And so in light of that, I want to ask you about a tweet that you just sent out, which I was amazed by. It was in Spanish, but here's what the tweet said. I got my voter credential to vote from the United States in the elections in Mexico on July 1st. Now I have to register and wait for my ballot by mail. It's an expensive and complicated process, but you have to do it. I thought you were an American.
I am Mexican and I am American. That's completely legal. And I wish I could give you an easier explanation on my identity, but that's exactly who I am. I was born in Mexico. I became a U.S. citizen, and that's why I have the chance to do that. And I feel very proud of being from Mexico and very proud from being from the United States. I see nothing wrong with that.
Okay, there's nothing wrong with being from Mexico. I agree with that completely. What's wrong is that when you became a citizen, you took this following oath. This was a pledge. And you said you swore absolutely and entirely to renounce all allegiance to any any foreign state you have ever been a citizen of. You took that oath, but you're voting in a foreign election? How does that, why are you doing that?
I'm voting in Mexico, and I'm voting here in the United States, and there's absolutely nothing wrong. Some countries allow that, and that's precisely why I have a U.S. passport and I have a Mexican passport.
But there is something.
And by the way, I'm not the only one, and I think I can participate fully in the U.S. electorally, and I can do exactly the same thing with Mexico. And the relationship between Mexicans and Mexican Americans is perfectly legal.
But
so I see absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Okay, but I think a lot of our viewers may not know that you can vote in a foreign election because, again, and you had to show ID to do that.
Now they know.
You had to show ID
and it's happening in Mexico, and it's happening in Europe, and it's happening with many countries, not only Mexico and the U.S. Last time I checked, Mexico is not invading the U.S., and we're not at war. That's the last time I checked.
You're not invading the United States, and yet Mexican citizens live in this country, vote in Mexican elections, and then write books telling Americans like me how we should run our government. When you clearly haven't renounced your loyalty to a foreign government, why should I take you seriously? With respect.
I happen to be also a U.S. citizen, and sometimes, and that's precisely the title of the book, sometimes I do feel like a stranger, because it seems, as you just pointed out, that for many Americans I'm not American enough, and believe me,
you're voting
believe it or not,
in a foreign election. Wait, hold on. It's not about Mexico. It could be any country. But why should I take you seriously as an American if you are still tied to a country, despite the oath you took, apparently disingenuously, to renounce your ties to that country? You're weighing in a foreign election. In what sense are you fully American? Sincerely.
Okay, well, just because of my arguments, and just because I'm a U.S. citizen, just as you are. So now it seems that
I'm not voting in foreign elections.
So it seems that I cannot complain about Donald Trump being the most anti-immigrant president since the 1950s.
Of course, you can complain all you want. You can complain all you want.
Simply because I can vote here, and because I have dual citizenship.
I'm asking why I should take you seriously, and I'm just going to let our viewers decide their view on that. But let me ask you about the story that we just played. So here you have someone who has been charged by authorities with homicide and fleeing the scene of a homicide. And federal authorities say this guy's in the country illegally. Nobody disputes that. And the city of Denver decides to let him go on a very small bond. Why wouldn't they call the federal government? Why would they prevent the federal government from enforcing federal law?
Well, the way you presented this story is, I don't know why you want to become state media, Tucker, because you are criminalizing all immigrants. You're suggesting
state media? I'm not criminalizing anybody. I'm asking about this specific
what Donald Trump is doing.
Spare me your Univision talking points. I'm asking a real question.
Okay, this is the argument. The argument is that the vast majority of immigrants, and you've heard this argument, the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals and are not rapists.
I agree with that.
They're not, and they're less likely to be criminals and be behind bars.
That's not true.
Those are the facts. Okay,
no, that's not true. The second point is not true. But look, I agree. Most immigrants are great people. I'm not disputing that.
You cannot criminalize every immigrant all the time.
I'm not trying to criminalize anybody. I'm not a law enforcement officer. I'm just noting that this guy has been charged in our country with homicide. And the authorities in Denver, for political reasons, under pressure from people like you, have decided that they're not going to turn him over to the feds, and now he walks free. Why should I, as an American citizen, be happy about that? That's it. I'm not attacking all immigrants.
So the argument... So I wish I could have that influence. But so the argument is about sanctuary cities. That's what you complain, right? That's what you don't want. Well, I mean, I think sanctuary cities are doing a great job defending immigrants that nobody else wants to defend.
But why this guy? Why this guy? He's charged with homicide. People in Denver don't care about theoretical arguments about trumping mean to immigrants. They don't want a guy charged with homicide who's here illegally wandering the street.
I'm not here to defend criminals. I'm not here to defend criminals, but just to criminalize all the immigrant population simply because of one person would be like if I would criminalize all the white population simply because of what Stephen Paddock did in Las Vegas, killing 58.
Well, you're part of the white population, if I could just point out. You always pull that card on the white population. You're whiter than I am, Jorge. Knock that stuff off. I'm not. You know what?
It is completely unfair to criticize the whole population or a whole group simply because of one person.
Okay. Of course, I agree with that. You should never attack people on the basis of things that other people did, of course. But I'm not talking about all people. I'm talking about this person who was protected by policies that you support and have advocated for, and the rest of us are suffering because of that. So why don't you tell me why it's a good idea to let this specific guy out of jail, Mr. Neck Tattoo, charged with homicide, and why should we be happy about that? They could have turned him over to the feds, and they didn't because of pressure from you.
Again, I'm not here defending any criminals, but I'm.
So will you say that this is a bad decision?
But I think sanctuary cities is a good idea. I think somebody has to defend immigrants. You know, I was listening to.
But who's going to defend the rest of us? Why should we be for this, American citizens?
Let me give you another argument. I've been listening to what's happening in Los Angeles. It's also sanctuary city, and the Los Angeles Police Chief Charlie Beck said the following: that the reports of sexual assault and domestic violence in the city Latinos residents has declined. Why? Because of fear. And then he said the following, which I think is very powerful. He said, imagine a young woman, imagine your daughter, your sister, your mother not reporting a sexual assault because they are afraid that their family will be torn apart.
Let me just say, he doesn't know that.
You don't support,
no, that's not a real statistic because
this is what
it's
could happen,
purely,
Tucker.
No, it's not. That's purely speculative. He's a political hack sucking up to his political masters. He can't know that. That's not social science.
Sexual assault was 25% in Los Angeles. The reports of domestic violence decreased 10% within the city, the Latino population. So this is happening. This is real.
I think I didn't see you in my statistics class in college, and you should have come because you would have known that's not a real one. Anyway, Jorge, thank you for joining us. I hope you'll come back.
Tucker.
And congrats on the book.
Thanks.
Well, the left is declaring public figures to be non-persons over the slightest verbal infraction. This is happening in government. It's happening especially in the private sector and on campus. Yet some of the left has nothing bad to say about Louis Farrakhan. What's their thinking on that? That story coming up.
Liberty.
The message is out, and everybody on the left has heard it wherever they get their talking points. Defend Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan at all costs. In late February, Farrakhan railed against Jewish people at an event. He said they created apartheid and were causing black men to become gay through the use of marijuana. Women's March national co-chair Tamika Mallory will not denounce him. Meanwhile, The Atlantic magazine, which all the smart people read, has published a piece defending him, in effect, citing the Nation of Islam's role in poor communities. Marjorie Clifton is a consultant and a self-described feminist, and she joins us tonight. Marjorie, it's great to see you.
Good to see you. How are you?
So I knew you were a feminist. I had no idea that Louis Farrakhan was sympathetic to feminism. I went to the Million Man March in '95. I think, actually, to be honest, I think there are worse people in America than Louis Farrakhan. But he's a hater, and he's certainly not a feminist, and he's an open bigot. So, like, why would the Women's March, which is about women and progressive values, be tied to him?
Well, it actually wasn't. They just came out in a public statement and denounced his statements that were anti-Semitic. But what's interesting about the Women's March, it is in a movement that is embracing a lot of different kinds of women. So you've got women coming from the African-American community, the Jewish community, the white community, the Muslim community, and it's complicated. And one of the amazing things that I'm seeing in this movement is a willingness to acknowledge that sometimes we step in it because we are in some ways not aware of how even just participation in an event, like we saw with Tamika Mallory, who attended an event where he was speaking, offended others. And what's great about her is she has come forward and apologized to those around her for the ways that she created. And she has very publicly come out and said, of course I do not defend those statements. And of course I denounce
but that's actually, but if I can do, wow, I've never seen a gloss like that. It's in fact, I'm blinded by the sheen from the gloss that you just put on that. She didn't actually say that. She continued to defend him. She initially refused until the media noise got so loud from the right that she couldn't ignore it. She defended him and said, I'm not disavowing him. And it's so are you suggesting that she didn't know of his views? She doesn't have Google or Wikipedia where she is?
What I think she didn't realize was that in one thing he said, and actually, as you said it in the last segment, one person, an entire movement shouldn't be discredited for the actions of someone associated in any removed way, and that's what we're talking about.
But
here.
wait a second. No, hold on. But hold on. I can't let you go on that because again, I just want to be clear. I think there are worse people than Louis Farrakhan. I think Farrakhan's repugnant. But I think they probably do some decent things in neighborhoods. I mean, I try not to paint in stark stark contrast. But by the standards that you're espousing and that Tamika Mallory is espousing, where if you've ever met anybody with whom the Atlantic magazine disagrees, or if you've ever said anything that doesn't kind of conform to our current sensibilities, you're out, man. You're fired from your job. There's no redemption. There's no apology that will ever cleanse your sins. Those are the standards that you are pushing. So why do you apply different standards to yourself?
Actually, I'm not. And what I'm actually espousing is that in any movement, and this is true, by the way, of any administration, anyone else, there should be the opportunity to repair where something has done wrong. And I think that's true in terms of how the Me Too movement's handled, all of these others, is that you cannot be guilty as accused on one shot. It doesn't mean that every person is perfect. It doesn't mean that we can't step in it and correct and repair. And that's what she is doing, by the way. And so this movement is acknowledging we're coming at this from a lot of different angles. And,
Okay,
it's interesting.
So what I guess what you're saying is there are probably good people on both sides of it. Is that what you're saying? Kind of the Charlottesville line on this? Okay, yeah. So
that's different. No, Tucker,
it's totally different. I'm sorry. So because it's not your side, so it's totally different. But there are good people on both sides. That is kind of what you're saying. I mean, you agreed. No.
What I'm saying is that this is a movement that's very different. It's not a single platform. It's encompassing all that was about inclusion. That means anyone with disabilities. It means
I get it, but these are the leaders. But hold on, these are not some random people. These are the leaders of the movement, including Linda Sarsour. So let's just re-engineer this, reverse engineer it if we could. What about Farrakhan do you think they found appealing? They went out of their way to tie themselves to him and to defend him. Why, I wonder?
No, actually, they didn't, and they did not. They don't have him representing it. What they denounced was his statements, but he was involved.
But what did they like? I mean, why do you suppose she went to one of his? I mean, look, everybody over the age of 3 who can read English knows his views because they're the most famous thing about him. They're openly racist. So why would she go to one of his events? Was she the only person who didn't know? I'm honestly confused.
See, he was very involved in the civil rights movement, and it's interesting because I'm not an African-American woman.
I remember him calling for racial separatism in alliance with the KKK, actually. So he wasn't involved in the civil rights movement.
He was an organizer. He was an organizer in the Million Man March that you participated in.
Yeah, that was 1995, 30 years later.
But let me offer another way of looking at it, okay? I'm not an African-American woman, and it's interesting because I've talked to others in the African-American community that said when O.J., was basically on trial. It was a very hard thing to get their heads around that he could, in a sense, not betray the movement, but do something wrong because he was an idol in that community. And I think there are people that do good things, but they also, can do bad things. But it doesn't make the whole movement discredited.
I agree with you. Let me just say, let me stop right now and just say, I totally agree. And we're all flawed. And good people do bad things. And by the way, bad people do good things because that's the nature of life. And so I hope you will add your voice to the tiny chorus of people reminding everyone else of that the next time someone gets fired from his job because he had lunch with someone that he doesn't agree with. Like, can you please help convince people that that's true? Okay, good.
That is if I had one mission in life, it would be get people together and talk about it, give people an opportunity to repair, restore cultures of organizations when bad things happen. For example, the entire Catholic faith is not discredited by the fact that there were priests who were pedophiles. Billy Graham was not a bad person because he associated with Nixon at one point in time. That doesn't discredit his life's work.
Well, good.
So we can't take things that way.
I found the one reasonable liberal tonight. Thank you, Marjorie, because I agree with all of that, and I appreciate your saying it. Thanks. Well, Republicans control the House. They control the Senate. They, of course, control the White House. Why are they still sending billions of taxpayer dollars over time to Planned Parenthood, which is an explicitly Democratic organization whose leaders just spoke at the 2016 Democratic Convention? Talk to a Republican member of Congress next about that.
It's okay to...
Connor Lamb the sham, right? Lamb the sham. He's trying to act like a Republican, so he won't give me one vote. Look, I don't know him. Looks like a nice guy. I hear he's nice looking. I think I'm better looking than him. I do. And he's slightly younger than me. Slightly. No, I heard that. Then I saw it. He's okay. He's all right. Personally, I like Rick Saccone. I think he's handsome.
He's a very handsome man. That was President Trump in Pittsburgh over the weekend. Tomorrow night is a special election in the 18th Congressional District of Pennsylvania. The president won that district by 20 points in the presidential election. Recent polls show a pretty tough situation, though, for Republicans. Many have the Democratic candidate, Connor Lamb, in the lead. Obviously, we'll have the results here tomorrow night. Maybe surprised, maybe not, but of course we'll tell you first. Well, if the Republican base is having trouble turning out its base for the 2016, rather for the special election this year, failure to fulfill its promises might be part of that. Congressional Republicans have repeatedly promised to defund Planned Parenthood. That hasn't happened or even come close to happening. Even now, the country's biggest abortion provider gets more than $500 million taxpayer dollars every year. Would Democrats be okay if the NRA got $500 million a year? Would they let that stand? Congresswoman Diane Black is a Republican representing Tennessee. She is, of course, opposed to this completely, and she joins us tonight. Congresswoman, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Tucker, for having me on.
So you've said many times on the record, and you seem like one of the more sincere Republican members on this question, that you're opposed to giving $500 million to Planned Parenthood, which is basically just an adjunct to the Democratic Party. Why hasn't the Republican Congress defunded it? Specifically, why?
Tucker, that goes over to the Senate. Twice now, with my leadership, we have passed in 2015 and in 2017 a measure in the House, sent it over to the Senate, and they have not done the work. I will challenge anybody that's watching this show that's pro-life to call your senator and ask them where do they stand on this issue. Because we have done our work in the House, they need to do their work in the Senate.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't even think you need to be pro-life or opposed to abortion. I am. But even if you weren't, you would say, well, Planned Parenthood is part of the Democratic Party. Cecile Richards, who ran it until recently, spoke at the 2016 Democratic Convention. They're getting $500 million of tax money involuntarily from the rest of us to campaign for Democratic candidates. I mean, how is that even constitutional?
Well, they shouldn't even be using their money for that, but they do raise additional dollars through the communities, and that's fine if they want to spend their money that way, but we don't need to be having taxpayer dollars going to abortion, period. The end of that. And as a matter of fact, if you look at the Title X dollars, you'll see that they were set up for family planning. Abortion is not family planning, it's family destruction. And so we should not even be giving them a single penny if they're doing providing abortion. So my default plan,
right, and it's a self-reinforcing loop. They lobby to keep their funding in place, so they keep getting funding. It's infuriating. So, but why wouldn't I mean, if that's the way we're going to do it, if you're going to figure out a way to get taxpayers to pay for one of your biggest political supporters to campaign for you, then why aren't Republicans saying the NRA, which trains a ton of law enforcement and military, trains everybody guarding our nuclear power facilities, for example, why don't they get $500 million a year in federal money to do the good work that they do?
Could you just imagine that? Could you imagine the uproar by the left if we were to be doing that? I mean, this is ludicrous. And my bill simply says, look, if Planned Parenthood really wants to provide the services that they say they provide, and that is true family planning without abortion, then do so. Separate your abortion from your regular family planning. And then, you know, you could get those dollars. It makes sense. Course. But I simply say take them away from them until they can show that not a single dollar in their clinics are being used for abortions. Neither are they giving money to those organizations that provide abortions.
Yeah. I mean, that is a key Democratic plank. That is maybe the invaluable Democratic plank. Abortion equals happiness. And I just don't think that's true. And
Tucker, I want to give the president a shout out on this because we were able to, through the Congressional Review Act, the CRA, to be able to overturn an Obama rule that said we in our state of Tennessee, which I was able to do before I went to Congress, to make sure that none of our dollars were going to Planned Parenthood or abortion clinics, that we were able to do that in our state. There were 11 states doing this already. Obama took that right away, and I want to just say thank you to the president who signed a Congressional Review Act that gave us back that right in Tennessee to make sure that our dollars are being used.
Well, I'm for that, but let's cut off the $500 million from the rest of us. That would be nice, too. Congresswoman, thank you.
Thank you for having me on, Tucker.
A large number of pilots and defense officials, a huge number, amazingly, think that there is actual real evidence that cannot be ignored that UFOs are entirely real. For real. Why doesn't the government seem interested in this? A former Pentagon UFO investigator joins us next. UFOs have captivated the public interest for decades, but they've always been dismissed, including by me, as the province of wackos. But that is changing thanks to some remarkable videotape and first-hand accounts from very sober people who are trained to identify aircraft. And that would include this video. It shows two Navy pilots encountering something bizarre off the east coast of the United States. Watch this.
Nickel 6-1 Tango, moving target?
No, I took an auto track.
Oh, okay.
Oh my gosh, dude.
Wow.
Okay, these are guys who fly for a living, who know what other airplanes look like, including those maintained by foreign governments, and they're totally shocked by this. This is one among many incidents like it, including many that have happened in the middle of the day to sober people, lots of independent witnesses at the same event, commercial pilots, military pilots, O'Hare Airport in the afternoon. None of them have obvious explanations. These are aircraft, apparently, that are moving in ways that appear to violate physics, that are flying very differently from any aircraft ever observed, and way faster than any plane that we know any foreign country has. What is this? Well, we don't know, because for some reason the Defense Department is not interested in finding out. Lou Elizondo is a former Pentagon official. He helped research UFOs. He said the DoD is not taking any of this seriously for some reason. Mr. Elizondo joins us tonight. Lou, good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
So did I overstate that? Is there a growing corpus of evidence, not drunk people on a lonely rural road at 3 in the morning, but sober military pilots saying something that we can't explain is happening?
That is correct. You're talking about individuals who have very high security clearances. They are trained observers. We've actually paid them and put them through schools to be trained and very keen observers to scrutinize what they're seeing. These are individuals who we trust to fly weapons platforms, sometimes with live munitions, over U.S. cities and to fight and win wars on our behalf. And they're reporting to us that they're seeing something that they can't explain, and it's also being backed up by the video evidence and the radar data and other witnesses.
But these must just be weather balloons, right?
Well, the weather balloons that are expressing technologies that are far beyond our current understanding of aerodynamics, things that are maneuvering in ways that no aircraft that we are currently aware of has that capability to. Flight performance characteristics that are well beyond the threshold of what we would consider, I think, normal or routine for aircraft.
So they have no flight surfaces, no wings or anything approaching a wing, and there's also no obvious propulsion. So infrared doesn't pick up any jet trail or rocket exhaust coming out of these things.
Right, or a plume. You know, there's many ways to have propulsion. You can do it with a jet engine, for example, right, a propeller, or a rocket engine. In this particular case, you have objects that are doing things, maneuvering in ways without any obvious sign of propulsion, and defying the natural effects of Earth's gravitational.
At what speeds?
Pull. Some are very, very, very fast.
Faster than our aircraft or non-aircraft?
Absolutely, hypersonic speeds, and by the way, without any obvious signs or signatures involved. So when an object's moving through the atmosphere, you would expect it to have certain signatures associated with that particular aircraft, whether it's a missile, drone, rocket. So for example, you might see a heat signature coming from it. You might see ionization of the atmosphere. Right. You might hear a sonic boom, which you normally would. It's an acoustic signature. In this particular case, these objects don't have any of those signatures.
So we know that they're not U.S. military because they wouldn't be flying near U.S. military aircraft, as they so often have. And it seems like we would know if foreign countries had that technology. Look, I have no idea what it is. The bottom line is this is a potential threat, a grave one, to our country. What is DoD doing about it?
Well, I can't speak on behalf of DoD right now because I'm no longer employed as a Department of Defense employee, but I can speak to what they were doing about it and what they weren't doing about it when I was part of the program. I think DoD is a very large, complex organization. I think it's very good at what it normally does, but in this particular case, we had a very ill-defined problem set. And so when you're going to the boss and you say, look, boss, we have something here, we don't know what it is. We sure don't know how it works, and by the way, there's nothing we can do about it. That is a very difficult conversation to have in an organization that is, its sole mission is national security, right?
I think it's terrifying. I mean, this seems potentially like one of the biggest stories of my lifetime, and I don't care if it's about UFOs or whatever you call it. Something that we don't understand is getting very close to our military aircraft, and the government isn't responding adequately. And I hope you keep sounding the alarm on this.
Yeah, I think, if I may, just very quickly.
We got 10 seconds.
Okay. You go to the metro, you see a sign, see something, say something, and we get an attaboy for reporting it. In this particular case, these pilots who are seeing something and is backed up by other data, it's nothing.
It's terrifying. That's the essence of dysfunction. Lou, thank you for that. I hope you'll come back. We'll have more on tonight's breaking Russia report. That's next. This is a Fox News alert. Republicans on the House